I'm John Lehman. This past week, the 2010 Detroit Auto Show has just convened, and as you can imagine, with much less fanfare than in previous years. Here's a quick look at some of the new models that are being showcased this year, and a little bit of commentary from some of the management at the Detroit Auto Show. The leading research agencies in the space is Auto Pacific. I'm joined now with Dan Hall. Dan Hall is just returning from a few days at the show, and he can give us an insider's look at how market research is going to be utilized after viewing the new product showcased at this year's event. So with me I have Dan Hall. Dan Hall is actually Vice President of Auto Pacific and recently is right out of the Detroit Auto Show, and we're very happy to have him with him. And so Dan, could you give us a little bit of idea of how the show this year was different from years past, and how do you see that you'll be using information that you gained at this auto show for your research practices at Auto Pacific?
Well, John, first of all, thanks for having us here. We appreciate it. The show this year was, like last year's show, a bit more somber than we've seen in previous years. Not quite so much as last year's show. Last year, everybody seemed to be in shock. There were actually areas of the show floor last year that appeared that there were not displays there, and they didn't realize there were not going to be displays there. No carpet, nothing. This year it was smaller, but it was obvious that they were aware of that. So it was a bit more well laid out and well planned. As far as new introductions, there were only a few concept vehicles, and much of what we're seeing is green. Really is about electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, also some high-efficiency clean diesels as well, which has been a theme that we've seen in the last few years. It's an ongoing theme, and I think it's popular in the United States. So from a PR perspective, it makes well for the manufacturers, but also in terms of what we need to do in terms of the objectives for the automotive industry, improving fuel economy. There seems to be a lot of different options moving out there.
Sure. A lot of the funding that came into it obviously put a lot of probably differences in the atmosphere about how they portrayed the event itself. But did you see a lot of activities that were more subdued and less celebratory than in previous years with big galas and such?
Yeah, absolutely. During both press days, I never once smelled fireworks, which is pretty uncharacteristic for the Detroit Auto Show. Usually there's quite a bit of fireworks. A couple of years ago, I think we had an off-road vehicle driving through plate glass, and that's pretty common. This year, I think I saw 2 dance crews dancing and a little bit of white smoke, the same sort of thing that somebody could put out on their front porch for Halloween. So it wasn't really quite the extravagance that we're used to. In a way, for me, it was refreshing, though, because we're talking about a business, ultimately, and I know that the automobile business is very much related to the experience of owning a vehicle and the drama, so to speak, of owning a vehicle. But in these times right now, it's more important to make sure we're making the right vehicles than how we necessarily portray them during a 2-day press event. So you can see that all the manufacturers have dialed back in that regard. Keeping in mind, they have to do this in multiple markets. It's not just Detroit. So when they dial back at the Detroit Auto Show, it's an indication of what they're doing worldwide, which is dialing back their expenditures.
Sure. And in keeping with that theme, were there other manufacturers that were the non-domestic manufacturers that came in with many of the same models that they're trying to bring import into the United States?
Well, it was interesting to me. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly, but for instance, Mercedes-Benz had 3 hybrid vehicles. Yeah, and as you know, historically in Europe, diesel has been the choice for high mileage vehicles. But in the U.S., hybrids are much more popular. Americans associate them with being cleaner than diesel. And so it's interesting to watch the German manufacturers, not just Mercedes-Benz, but show hybrid vehicles, basically saying, you know, nodding to the consumer and saying, okay, this is what you want, we'll provide it. Whereas as little as 24, 36 months ago, their argument was these are not appropriate, the diesel's the right answer. But they've kind of slowed down that tune and now are more listening to what the consumers are saying.
Wow, so you think there really may be a shift then to more of a customer pull than manufacturers pushing out their technology and hoping that the consumer takes hold?
Yeah, that's in the case of diesel versus hybrid, I think you're absolutely right. That's exactly what's happening. Because there's been a lot of discussion about the German manufacturers coming into the U.S. market and illustrating, rightly so, how well diesels perform from a fuel economy approach. But if Americans are not going to bite that right now, then they have to respond to their customers. And so to see German manufacturers coming and showing hybrid vehicles as opposed to diesel shows that they're listening to what they're hearing from consumers.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Dan, and wish Auto Pacific all the luck this year, and want to make sure that our audience gets a chance to view you online. Where can our listener audience find Auto Pacific and contact you to learn more about some of the syndicated and proprietary engagements that you provide for the research industry?
Sure. Our web address essentially is our name, www.autopacific.com. So AUTO, Pacific like the ocean.com. We have been in the automotive market research business since 1986, so we're going on our 25th year, which we'll be celebrating later this month. So we're really looking forward to that. But yeah, that's a good place to take a look.
I'd like to extend my sincere thank you to Dan Hall for sharing with us some of his experiences from the Detroit Auto Show this year. And I'd like to welcome you back to the MRB Newsroom as we'll continue to trace news on this topic and others.